Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship. And faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
London's Victoria Station is looking its best as Britain's leaders prepare to welcome the President of Turkey on a state visit. One pace behind the head of state stands her son and heir, now perhaps halfway through what he has called the longest apprenticeship ever. It looks as if Prince Charles will have to play the role of attendant lord or monarch in waiting on occasions like this for many years to come. But only a small part of his life, as yet, is devoted to the ceremonial duties required of a future king. The rest is very much what he chooses to make of it. However hard he looks for a role, the British Constitution fails to define one for the Prince of Wales. It is full of advice about what he should not do, but silent as to what he should. Heir to the throne since the age of 3, and likely to be a grandfather in his mid-60s before he succeeds, the prince is saddled with a major identity problem. To the public, moreover, who know him only through press and television, his life so far may well seem as haphazard as random pages of a family scrapbook, or perhaps an unfinished jigsaw puzzle. Which is the real Charles? Does he really know himself? The prince is one of the best-known men in the country, but he is also one of the most misunderstood. It cannot be easy, for instance, to be hardly ever alone, as I saw for myself when I joined him on one of his rare days off last summer, set aside for some tranquil birdwatching on a remote island off the Welsh coast. It was one of countless such days I've spent shadowing the prince in 10 years of watching and writing about him. It's part of Charles's job to let the public see him relax as much as ensuring they see him on duty. The press and TV are thus reluctantly tolerated on outings such as this, but they do tend rather to spoil things for him.
Mind the hole there.
Not just at the time, trampling rare birds' nests underfoot and generally getting in the way. Afterwards, too, he usually feels he's been misrepresented. But this carnival of chaos is the only means Charles has of trying to put his true self across and give some shape to the uncomfortably vague job inherited by a Prince of Wales.
It doesn't take salt. What are you going to watch? You don't bust your ankle in these rabbit holes.
Being born a prince, however, also has its perks, such as a timely rescue by the Royal Navy. As Charles celebrates his 40th birthday, what has he made of the unenviable hand he's been dealt? November the 14th, 1948.
It has just been announced from Buckingham Palace that Her Royal Highness, the Princess Elizabeth, Duchess of Edinburgh, was safely delivered of a prince at 9:14 p.m. Listeners will wish us to offer their loyal congratulations to Princess Elizabeth and the royal family on this happy occasion.
Charles was the first heir to the throne in British history to be sent to school with other children. At Hill House, a smart London day school, his parents hoped that he could become just another normal schoolboy, lost in a crowd of well-to-do 6-year-olds. and at first he relished the chance to join in and make friends his own age. But the sheer impossibility of a normal life quickly set him apart. The schoolboy Charles became an ever more solitary and introspective child, embarked on a long voyage of self-discovery. At the age of 8, he reluctantly left home to go to Cheam, the Hampshire boarding school attended by his father before him. The name on his school trunk would soon change, for it was here, the following year, that his mother created him Prince of Wales, adding to the isolation of a boy young for his age, who already knew it was his duty to grin and bear it. His arrival at Gordonston was an even bigger wrench, as far from his family as he could be, facing 5 years of exile in the remote north of Scotland. Gordonston's Spartan ways may have suited the then obscure Prince Philip of Greece, but was it the right choice for his less self-confident son? It came as quite a change you can imagine from Buckingham Palace. The rather shy, nervous young prince arrived here to find that his kingdom consisted of an old wooden bed frame on bare floorboards among those of some 60 other boys. For the first time in his life, he had to clean his own shoes and make his own bed, and the day began at 7 a.m. with a run round the lawn. His other early duties included cleaning out the loos and emptying the dustbins. Charles began his days here a rather forlorn figure, unable to make trustworthy friends and daunted by the shadow of his father. These days, girls as well as boys man the cutter in which he trained in gale-force winds and tackle hazardous cliff rescues, all part of a community service ethic developed by the school's German-born founder, Kurt Hahn, who expected his pupils to live up to the school motto, "There is more in you." Hahn's precepts still inform the prince's life and thought. I discussed them with the current headmaster, Michael Maver.
Well, I think he was an optimistic man, and I think he always believed that there were things in people that ought to be discovered. So he wanted all young people to be given the chance to develop themselves and to bring out the best in themselves. And also, he's a wise old bird. He thought that people ought to fail sometimes and be subjected to challenges that might really stretch them.
The Prince of Wales in adult life seems to have developed a penchant for taking physical risks, parachute jumping, polo, which is a pretty dangerous game, the ski slopes and so on. Do you think this was engendered by Gordonston?
Possibly. I think it's also part of his character. That would be my estimation. Certainly one of the things we try to do here is to give people a fright in safety. What the Prince of Wales does now is, I suspect, partly fun. I think he enjoys doing all of those things.
The Prince also seems, as he's grown older, to have developed the rather solitary, introspective side of himself. I wonder if that too, perhaps, is a legacy of those days.
It might well be, and I think that solitude and thought are part of the Gordonston experience. I'm sure, again, it's part of his own character, and I think anyone who goes to school, the genes predominate. We can't actually change, we as teachers, we can't change the boys and girls that parents send us. The characters are formed in the womb. All we can do is bring out what is there and try to develop the good points and suppress, if you like, or help people to cope with the weak points. I'm sure that the Prince of Wales has this streak in him, whether it's from his parents or further back down the line, I don't know. But nonetheless, I think it's also important that when you're leading a busy, active life, whether it's intellectually or physically, that there are moments when you step back and consider, and you try to get things into perspective.
The young prince worked off his woes in the art department, where he made a friend in the art master still there today, Robert Waddell. Nowadays, Charles is known for his watercolors, but as a teenager, he found pottery more fun.
I think it would be fair to say that on the actual art side, he wasn't particularly gifted at that point, but he was very interested in looking at painting and trying it. But latterly, he found that working in clay gave him perhaps a speedier satisfaction and great pleasure, because he made marvelous, amusing animals. Instead of just simply doing straightforward pots, he would find bottle shapes and turn them into elephants trumpeting or cows with squint eyes or something. I mean, even at that point, his humor bubbled over into whatever he was doing.
At 16, he starred in the school play, and for once it raised a laugh when the three witches cried, "All hail, Macbeth, that shalt be king hereafter."
Professionals who saw it were amazed at the sort of ability that he could show, because from one rather cringing, frightened figure of Macbeth, he would spring into an angry, irate figure. I mean, he could weep, he could rant and rage. I think that it showed the sort of guts of the man, that he could take on a role like that and do it extraordinarily well.
After 4 years, Charles escaped to spend 2 terms at Timbertop, the remote country outpost of Australia's Geelong Grammar School. Here he made the first real friends of his life, who dealt with him as a human being rather than a prince. No one in Britain had dared call the heir to the throne a pommy bastard. Charles loved the directness of Australians, their lack of pretension, their indifference to rank and class.
I know that having gone to Australia, I was thrown to the lions, so to speak. I'm sorry to the Australians, but
Or the kangaroo.
the kangaroos, and that, I think, made the whole difference to my development. You know, I became much more independent. I felt more confident in myself, that I could do things, that I could actually go and talk to somebody without them talking to me first.
Back at Gordonston, it was a newly mature Charles who at last tackled the place on his own terms. He passed 3 A-levels and, like his father before him, was made guardian or head boy. The prince is remembered for dissuading the headmaster from caning younger boys. As he prepared for university, Charles opted for seclusion in a building known as the Donut, where he moved into this tiny room under the rafters of Robert Waddell's flat.
Was he a good tenant?
Yes, absolutely marvelous. But normally one expects a schoolboy of that age to have pop music coming screaming out, and the walls in any school building are paper thin. But he had always enjoyed classical music, so it tended mostly to be rather good music and a great joy to listen to. I mean, I learnt all sorts of bits and pieces of music that I hadn't heard before.
And the Goons had already begun to be a passion, had
Yes,
they?
and I have to confess that I'm sort of equally besotted by the Goons. So
Just as well,
From time to time, there were sort of long screams and conversations in nutty Goon language, which I think other people thought was quite mad.
For once not in his father's footsteps, Charles moved on to Trinity College, Cambridge, attended by several princes of Wales before him. But this one would be the first to risk taking a degree.
Trinity College waited to welcome a new freshman, and it's not every newcomer who's greeted by the master, Lord Butler. The occasion was both informal and formal, with Lord Butler introducing Prince Charles to Mr. Dennis Marion, the senior tutor.
He became very quickly good at organizing himself in a way that was not obvious from his school reports. He was able to pick out the important part of a question and to read really very widely round it and to amass this information and present essays which changed quite steadily from being schoolboy narrative to being much more academically orientated.
Here at Cambridge, I suspect, Charles lived in the real world more than ever before or since. Here he knew freedoms he would never enjoy again, to go out on a whim to a restaurant or a film, even a party or a political meeting. Here he discovered, as far as any royal ever can, how the other half lives. In a Welsh boy called Howell Jones, he made the first working-class friend of his life. 20 years on, Jones took me back up the well-worn staircase to the rooms then occupied by the student prince.
Oh, it's a rather handsome room. Is it pretty much as it was?
Actually, it's amazing. It looks pretty much as it did 20 years ago. Actually, some of the furniture is the identical
Really?
furniture to 20 years ago.
Same old chairs, eh?
Yeah.
So you used to sit here in these very chairs, talk deep into the night. What did you talk about?
The conversations were just like any student conversation. There were no sort of barriers and no things that we didn't talk about because he was the Prince of Wales. It was 20 years ago. I mean, we talked about Harold Wilson, we talked about Vietnam, we talked about the events in Paris, devaluation. I mean, you know, absolutely no holds barred.
But you've obviously kept to yourself all these years,
probably some things that would fascinate the world at large.
Well, yes, I have. But in the same way as I wouldn't give away confidences from any of my other friends, I mean, I wouldn't give away confidences of conversations we had in this room.
One story that does the rounds is that the Prince, I think, as a result of a conversation with you, asked Lord Butler if it would be all right for him to join the University Labour Club.
The strongest version of it was that I was a communist who tried to turn him into a communist. The glimmer, tiny, weeny element of truth in the story was that one night in our first year, the Prince of Wales happened to notice that I was a member of all the political clubs, Conservatives, Liberals, and so on. He asked me why, and I said, well, it was just convenient to be able to go and hear, you know, visiting speakers. And in a subsequent chat with Rab, he mentioned, could he do the same? And Rab advised against it. But then the story, and to be fair, to some extent in Rab's own mind, the story grew over the years.
Do you think, with the benefit of hindsight, that Cambridge really played an important part in the Prince's development?
I think the thing that strikes me most of all, actually, though, is the extent to which the principal characteristics of 20 years ago are still very much the same now. The sense of humour was there 20 years ago, and it's still there now. The lack of pretension is still there now as it was 20 years ago. And also the seriousness of purpose, but still having the sense of humour, is very much the same.
In the college reviews, Charles began a lifetime on stage, good training for a man destined to be a public performer all his days. Here, for once, was a prince not afraid to make a fool of himself.
There is a manic depression over Ireland with associated shocks of pay presto. An obsession under Sweden may develop or be relieved by a warm front. Behind that will come a cold back. Deep sea fishing boat with just my rod and line, the great unknown, a few helicopters and antics, but yes, I do believe I've got a bite. I have a bite. I'm letting out a little slack now. Yes, and taking up the strain. It is most exciting, ladies and gentlemen. I've never seen anything quite like it before. I think I've got quite a large one here. It's very, very large indeed.
He finished up with a 2-2 in his finals. Lord Butler, I know, believed that royal duties had interfered perhaps a bit too much in his last year. Do you think he could have got a better degree?
Oh, undoubtedly. If he'd cut down on the commitments which he wished to undertake, he would certainly, in my opinion, have got a 2-1. Many of his supervisor's reports made this quite clear. Over a term, the supervisor would say most of his work has been of a 2-1 standard. On a particular essay, such as the influence of the economic development on the landed gentry was one I remember. The work he put in was sort of well above a 2-1 standard.
And you, of all people, are in a position to reassure us that this was an entirely genuine degree.
Oh, yes, history is one of the few triposes which you can't fiddle, because they have still got the tradition that the name of the candidate doesn't appear on the paper, it's only a number. And after the lists are drawn up, then the numbers are transformed into names.
So the examiners wouldn't have known whose paper it was they were marking?
No.
Steadily, he was growing away from the powerful influence of both his parents, who now had two younger sons, Andrew and baby Edward, to take some of the spotlight off Charles and Anne. The prince began to undertake a few public duties, but still he dreaded the approach of his greatest ordeal so far, his investiture as Prince of Wales. In charge of the arrangements was the Constable of Carnarvon Castle, Lord Snowdon.
It was a kind of theatre in the round. I wanted the simplicity of that great architecture to speak for itself. And there's that old Victorian saying, never construct decoration, but only decorate construction. This is what we tried to do. I wanted it to be the best designed ceremony that had ever been. And I think that It was totally irrespective of what you believed in. It was going to be jolly good for Wales. That was the point. And so everything we did was made in Wales, and that's why we used slate for the round dais. People thought, I think quite wrongly, I was a kind of whiz kid. Actually, I was doing Henry V with Perspex. It was as simple as that.
Charles had made a good start by taking the trouble, unlike any Prince of Wales before him, to learn a bit of Welsh. Now he won over even reluctant Welsh hearts by making light of the bombs, death threats, and other nationalist protests which had stretched royal nerves as the big day approached.
But the only problem, of course, was that there always has to be some moment of horror, which was when I was given my speech by my private secretary and I laid it on my seat. And because I put on a mantle and everything else, I then sat down on top of my speech, as it turned out, without realizing it. And I then spent the next, whatever it was, 5, 10 minutes, trying to get this thing out without it looking as though I had a major problem on hand. In front of, what goodness knows how many million people watching.
This is the night mail crossing the border, bringing the check and the postal order, letters for the rich, letters for the poor, the shop at the corner and the girl next door, pulling up Beatock a steady climb, the gradient's against her, but she is on time. Passing the shunter, intent on its toil, moving the coke and the coal and the oil, girders for bridges, plastic for fridges, bricks for the site are required by tonight. Grimy and grey's the engine's reflection, down to the docks for the metal collection. The passenger train is full of commuters, bound for the office to work in computers. The teacher, the doctor, the actor in farce, the typist, the banker, the judge in first class, reading the Times with a crossword to do, returning at night on the 6:42.
Some of our passengers at Cathay Pacific will be surprised by the improvements to our Marco Polo business class.
A completely new environment.
Hope I can get some rest.
So you have wider seats now?
Very pleasantly surprised. Cathay Pacific's new Marco Polo business class, built to help the corporate body arrive in better shape.
Here at Smith's Lawn in Windsor Great Park, the Prince of Wales is relaxing in the way he likes best with a hard-fought Sunday afternoon game of polo. He's a better player, say the experts, than his father, Prince Philip, and he could be one of the best in the world if only he had more time to practice. But polo's not just a very expensive and rather aristocratic game, it's also pretty dangerous. To see the prince play is to see him vent his frustrations against the protocol and the red tape of so much of the rest of his life. For this reason, and because of a long-standing wish to earn all the attention that's paid to him everywhere he goes, the need to take risks runs deep in Prince Charles. Throughout his 20s, it seems to me, Charles searched in vain for the right way to win his spurs. The polo-playing playboy drowned out the philosopher prince, and falling off horses became an embarrassing habit. This fall left a deep scar on his left cheek, there to this day as a reminder that Charles, the macho young prince, was taking physical risks at the expense of intellectual ones. He was the first Prince of Wales to win his wings as a solo pilot, and the first to undertake a parachute jump.
I stood in the doorway and I didn't need kicking out by the sergeant. And I jumped out happily, except that after I jumped out, for some unknown reason, I must have hollow legs or something, my legs came up over my head, and the next thing I knew, they were tangled in the rigging lines. So I was looking up at them and coming down in a sort of U shape. Yes. And I said to myself, quite calmly, your legs are in the rigging lines, remove them. So I removed them, and fortunately, and by about whatever it was, 800 feet. And then I had a lovely sail down to sea level.
A skilled helicopter pilot, he was keen to try landing on Snowdon, the highest peak in his principality. Charles valued the privacy and solitude of the cockpit.
There's that superb form of mixture between fear and supreme enjoyment which comes over me. But then that marvelous panic when you don't really know quite where you are and you've got to sort it out for yourself. It's so much more exciting and challenging.
In Canada, he developed a particular rapport with his instructor, Alan McGregor, whom he directed in his own goonish version of the Keystone Cops.
Philly Productions present a horror film.
Right, now what do you think of that trip? Didn't like it. Well, I didn't like it either. It's absolutely rubbish. Look, you're supposed to go to LZ7. You end up at the wrong one. You pick up the wrong people in the wrong place.
Never.
Come on, why?
They jumped it out. One after the other.
The way you were flying it, they probably wanted to jump out.
Just because you got bigger legs than I have?
Absolutely.
You think
rubbish.
you can tell me what to do? Yeah.
Look, I will tell you one thing, and one thing only. Before we finish, I'm in charge.
It's all your fault.
Not my fault.
It.
I charge.
It's your fault.
You don't remember.
Do.
You get it all wrong.
No, it's your fault.
Don't smile at me. I'm going to make a pilot out of you if it kills me.
I hope it does to you, basic man, you. I'll get my own back on him if it's the last thing I do. Yes, I will.
Charles ended his service career with a command of his own, aboard the smallest ship in the Navy, the minehunter HMS Bronington. In his late 20s, however, the world's most eligible bachelor had more than mines in his sights. One of the oldest unmarried princes of Wales in centuries, Charles reserved the right to have some fun during his long and difficult search for the right bride. This sultry daughter of Rio was not the only girl to spin her web around the prince, a self-proclaimed romantic. For 10 years, he played the field, falling in love by his own confession on countless occasions. By his 30th birthday, however, he'd still not met the right girl to be his future queen. When finally she appeared, everyone wondered what had taken him so long. Lady Diana Spencer was literally the girl next door, born on the Queen's estate at Sandringham. The younger sister of one of his former loves, Shy Di, was the English rose he said he'd always been looking for. Just before they announced their engagement, Diana fled from the press to her mother's home in Australia.
I think there was a certain amount of press interest there, although they never actually found you, did they?
No.
But I rang up on one occasion and I said, can I speak? And they said, no, we're not taking any calls. So I said, well, is the Prince of Wales speaking? How do I know it's the Prince of Wales? Came back a reply. So I said, well, you don't, but I am, in a little rage.
Their marriage, to my mind, was a vital turning point in the making of Prince Charles. Now at last he could establish a truly independent life of his own and explore the alternative values close to his heart. But in that same summer of 1981, Britain's inner cities exploded into angry violence. From Brixton to Liverpool, ugly riots erupted on a scale not seen in living memory. It would take Charles another few years to realize it, but the causes and effects of these riots were to provide him with the focus for the crusade towards which his whole life had been building. Charles was now approaching a remarkable resolution to his long voyage of self-discovery, thanks to an unlikely mentor in the South African-born writer Lawrence van der Post, a devout disciple of the philosopher Carl Jung. Van der Post had made an extensive study of the Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, the so-called lost tribes in whose simple, unspoilt way of life he divined moral lessons for the civilized world. Twice Charles disappeared into the Kalahari with Van der Post, and in a people whose worldly goods could be carried on their backs, he too found lessons for his future kingdom. But Britain was unused to a prince with brains as well as a heart. When he showed an interest in other alternative lifestyles, he earned the disastrous tabloid nickname of the Loony Prince.
It's extremely good for the soul. If you're most of the time, I don't know, sitting at a desk, reading a lot of papers, rushing about, it's terribly good for the soul to go out and work with your hands and to muck out a cattle yard, to deliver calves, milk cows, mend stone walls or repair hedges or whatever. And I come back a different person.
Charles was now determined to set an example by leading a more balanced way of life. But the cry of loony was heard again when he made a perhaps too candid confession to a television interviewer.
I love coming in here and I potter about and sit and read, or I just come and talk to the plants, really. Very important to talk to them, they respond.
For an obvious joke to have been used against him, as it still is to this day, could not have been less fair. That same year, 1985, saw Charles begin to give his newfound world view a large-scale practical application. The pieces of the princely jigsaw were at last about to fall into place. The same man who'd been mocked as a loony was now hailed as a prince of conscience when he toured the crumbling Indian sweatshops of London's East End and was visibly appalled by the conditions he found there.
But do things get terribly damp?
Unafraid of political controversy, he began to speak his mind.
There is a great deal to be done in an area such as this. I know also that there have been in the past any number of projected initiatives of one kind or another. And one of the difficulties, I think, which has occurred is that local people tend to get rather disappointed, perhaps demoralised by the number of initiatives which very often have come perhaps to naught in the end, despite a lot of people's best intentions.
Charlie, don't forget us, darling.
You've got a hell of a good voice. Come on, come over here.
But Charles, the glorified social worker, had long had a little-known office way beyond the palace walls. Number 8, Bedford Row, in the heart of London's Bloomsbury, is what you might call the operational headquarters of Prince Charles, the social worker. And this plaque behind me by the front door, with the names of his various trusts and charities, is really an index of the extent and nature of his work. The fact that there are so many of these names and that they're constantly changing may give rise to some understandable confusion in the public mind about precisely what Prince Charles's crusade is all about. But it certainly gives the lie to the old accusation that he hasn't got a proper job. For a decade, small grants to thousands of disadvantaged young Britons had given them a better start in life. £1,000 from his Youth Business Trust, for instance, helped 2 unemployed Glaswegians buy a baker's oven. 5 years later, James MacDonald and Wallace McCracken are approaching an annual turnover of £5 million.
Well, we did get a lot of good publicity. The £1,000, if you've got nothing, obviously helped. But the publicity side, the fact that the Prince has come down to the bakery, opened it up, and we did get a lot of newspaper coverage.
Do you think people buy your stuff because they know, as you say, the Prince came and started it?
Well, it's possibly true to say that it did help, but we do have a good product, and that in combination with the Prince's Trust, I think the two of them complement each other.
And you even paid it back?
That's correct, yes. We felt that we had been given the opportunity, and possibly the funds, it is a charitable organisation, and we felt we were in a position to give somebody else the opportunity as we were given.
One man who has watched Charles at work with young people is the director of the Prince's Trust, Tom Shabir.
They tell me that what they expect, and I, with them before he arrives, rather tense about the arrival of this royal, who I suppose they reckon to be rather posh and I suppose even patronising. What they say is he's like one of us. He's on our side. He really understands what makes us tick, and I think he does understand what makes them tick. And the kids sense that, I think, probably better than anybody.
Charles may not always look one of us. He's much more at home at the opera, for instance, than at the rock concerts which raise millions of pounds for the Prince's Trust. But his work around the inner cities had, by the mid-1980s, become a mission which could not be ignored, not least by the government of the day. On the night of her last election victory, even the Prime Minister thought it time to climb aboard the royal bandwagon.
You will have a marvellous party tonight, and you can clear up tomorrow, but on Monday, you know, we've got a big job to do in some of those inner cities.
But Charles was ahead of Mrs. Thatcher. In the grim post-industrial landscape around Halifax, he was already at work rejuvenating the Yorkshire district of Calderdale, bringing new life to disused canals and textile mills, soon to be reborn as hotels, office blocks and leisure facilities. Whenever he can, the Prince drags captains of industry up here to see for themselves. It's one of the advantages of having the Prince of Wales as your president, according to Stephen O'Brien, the chief executive of Business in the Community.
He's very good at that and absolutely expert at really interesting business leaders in the problems that lie behind urban decay. It's not just that he gives them a gloss or tells them what he thinks they should do. That's absolutely not his style. He actually interests them in the problem itself and engages them in trying to help work out what the solution might be.
Are there not dangers for a Prince of Wales getting involved in the kind of work that Business in the Community does?
Yes, I'm sure there are dangers for him, but again, I think he's pretty expert at dodging the really sharp missiles that could come in his direction.
For instance, before Mrs. Thatcher's famous speech on the staircase of Central Office after the '87 election victory, Prince Charles was occasionally accused of being anti-government. Immediately she had made that speech, he's been accused of being Thatcherite. He's obviously walking quite a narrow political tightrope with BIC.
I think he's very often in a no-win situation, but I think that both perceptions of him are actually wrong. I don't have any feeling myself that he's for or against one particular government or potential government, and nor do I think that he's converted to any new beliefs that he didn't hold before. What I think he is very committed to trying to help forward the problems of urban decay, which after all have been with us for 100 years, despite governments of all complexions. And I think he sees a real role for himself, and I believe that he's perhaps the one figure around whom so many of the rest of us can actually coalesce.
So this is it, spread out behind me, the Yorkshire district of Calderdale, all 140 square miles of it, scene of Prince Charles's most ambitious undertaking yet in this country. A Prince of Wales may have no political power these days, but he has an enormous amount of influence. And it's in regeneration projects like this one that the Prince believes he's putting that influence to its best use. Charles is staking quite a lot of his prestige on Calderdale, but he hopes and believes that success here, if things work out, might inspire many more such projects, breathing life back into communities all over his future kingdom. The same philosophy is at work, it seems to me, in Charles's architectural campaigns, which began here in Trafalgar Square. The proposed extension to the National Gallery, he famously declared, would be a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much-loved friend. This design was doomed from that moment. Charles's rage against modern architecture reserved a special passion for what he called the destruction of the London skyline and the post-war municipal mediocrity crowding the dome of St. Paul's. Wren's noble monument arose from the ashes of the Great Fire of 1666. And briefly stood proud over an 18th century landscape which looked to Canaletto quite as elegant as his native Venice. But the bombing of St. Paul's led to a rebuilding program denounced by the Prince late last year.
Did modern planners and architects in London ever use their eyes? Those planners swept away the lanes and alleys, hidden away squares and courtyards, which in most other European countries would have been lovingly rebuilt after the war. You have, ladies and gentlemen, to give this much to the Luftwaffe. When it knocked down our buildings, it didn't replace them with anything more offensive than rubble. We did that. Large numbers of us in this country are fed up with being talked down to and dictated to by the existing planning, architectural and development establishment.
Paternoster Square can't cope with the technological demands of the 1980s, and it's anyway already crumbling at the edges. But when the nervous redevelopers showed the Prince all 6 potential new plans last year, he condemned the lot, starting an argument which rages to this day. With the Prince's tacit blessing, there arose an alternative scheme designed by the architect John Simpson, who reverted to medieval street patterns and an almost Renaissance look. But will it, even with the Prince's support, ever be built? Charles's Luftwaffe speech drew a huge public response. Everyone seems to think that the London skyline is being ruined, and even the architects agree that this area around St. Paul's, this huge concrete and glass wasteland of Paternoster Square, is one of the great unmitigated disasters of post-war planning. Here, as the Prince said, is a unique chance to try and get it right the second time around. But does he really have the right to appoint himself some sort of supreme national planning officer, preempting statutory procedures by dismissing 6 major projects out of hand before the public's even had a chance to look at them? Does his taste come to that really represent mass popular taste with its romantic yearnings for 18th century classicism? There are many who think not. Among them, perhaps someone rather close to home. Earlier this year, the Duke of Edinburgh made a speech in which he said, quote, "It would be a great pity if regeneration created 18th century cities in the 21st. Was Prince Philip taking a bit of a dig at his son? Since the arrival of his own two sons, the proverbial heir and spare, Prince Charles has been relieved of yet another of the unlikely pressures upon him, the obligation to ensure the succession.
You've been in?
All been
in. Have you? Gosh. Future helicopter pilot.
Yes.
Where to die?
But the young princes must make the most of the precious little time their father can spend with them. A helicopter in the front garden can only mean that it's come to take him off to work. For amid the Prince of Wales's crusade, the monarch-in-waiting's ritual apprenticeship must go on. The two roles can jostle uneasily against each other. Though he values the ceremonial side of monarchy, standing in for the Queen on more and more occasions, such as this investiture, Charles can grow impatient with the protocol and red tape which clog his life. His mother has decided firmly against abdication, which she believes would devalue the crown. So he'll find it hard to play a more substantial part in affairs of state, but he keeps up a constant quest for other useful roles. He likes to think of himself, for instance, as an unofficial ambassador for Britain, meeting with heads of state all over the world and promoting British interests wherever he can. A Prince of Wales can scarcely influence world affairs these days, but he can assist exports and generate goodwill. Closer ties between the churches of England and Rome is another cause he's championed, though on this occasion the Queen had to deny her son his wish to attend a papal communion, reminding him that he will one day be head of the Anglican Church. Even at 40, Charles can still slip on banana skins of his own making. Above all, he is passionate about the Commonwealth, of which he will also one day be head. Australia remains his favourite home from home. One of his biggest regrets was his failure to become its Governor-General.
As it happened so long ago, many of you may not realize that part of my own education took place here in Australia. Quite frankly, it was by far the best part. While I was here, I had the pommy bits bashed off me, like chips off an old block, and the results are only too obvious. But my wife and I are particularly glad to be here this year, on this great day, to help you, as if the Aussies needed help in anything, to celebrate your good fortune and to wish you well for a future that holds out such great promise. The particular position that I find myself in, and my wife, there is no actual laid down job or role, and you have to a certain extent, do as you think right and fit. It'd be quite easy to do nothing, in fact. So it's really just the way you feel that things should be done. And above all else, I think the important thing is to serve this country and its people and the Commonwealth.
Perhaps his biggest problem will always be getting himself and his message across. The British press trivialise and distort Charles's life, showing less interest in his public work than his wife's latest hat. James Whittaker of the Mirror spends hours at a time training his binoculars on Balmoral in the hope of a rare royal sighting.
I imagine they're having their crumpets at tea time, which they tend to do at this time of year. But no, I mean, it's raining at the moment and the children aren't playing out. But when they go on those lawns, you can see them. And over the years, I've seen the Queen, they go for rides up that walk there, and you can see enough. You might have to spend several hours here before you get it, but
it's worth it to you to spend 7 or 8 hours on this rock.
I've spent as long as that, yes.
For a glimpse of the Queen and her grandchildren in, that's the back garden, I guess, behind the castle.
Yes, that's right.
On this side of the river down there, we're on public land. Over the other side, it's all royal property. To what extent do you go across the river into the private royal territory?
Never, he said sanctimoniously. No, you run into grave trouble if you start trespassing, and I make certain that, except under extreme circumstances, which have happened in the past, I don't trespass. In fact, it was just down there in 1980 that Diana was first pictured with Prince Charles. And on that occasion, I did trespass, I have to admit.
Did you get into trouble for that day?
No, I didn't actually, because I didn't actually get caught, except the Queen went riding by and gave us a bit of a black look. And a message came filtering through later, in fact, at the Braemar gathering, that she wasn't that pleased that the Prince of Wales, Diana was not mentioned, the Prince of Wales's fishing had been disturbed. Well, it wasn't his fishing we were disturbed. He was, in fact, down on the riverbank with Diana.
Well, even though we're standing on public ground here, there are those who'd say that this is an invasion of privacy, peering into their back garden. Would you agree with that?
I would, I'm afraid, yes. It's a tricky one. People do want to know. I think people have a right to know. I think it is, to a degree, an invasion, but I am standing on public property here, and it is my job as a reporter to do this. There are times when I'm not that keen on what I do, I have to admit.
Prince Charles himself often criticizes the tabloids. Would you say that they give the public an accurate picture of him?
Both you and I look at him through very critical eyes, as we're entitled to. I mean, he's going to be head of state one day, and I think we're entitled to dissect him heavily, but on the whole, I think he does very well.
Well, James, I think I'm going to go and get a cup of tea, but are you going to stay here for a few more hours on the off chance of seeing something in the back garden?
Getting invited in for the crumpets. Well, I mean, it's early to go home yet, isn't it?
So what are we to make of Charles at 40? Few have yet realized it, but in his campaigns around the London skyline, the inner cities, and other worlds, from farming to medicine, there is a common thread. They're all parts, I believe, of a giant royal jigsaw, which in the last few years has pieced together as a princely bill of human rights, exalting the qualities of every individual and his or her right to have a say in the type of world in which they live and work. In the process, Charles has realized that he has much more freedom of movement as heir to the throne than he will have as king. This is where his long quest for himself and his role has finally led. Ambushes and pitfalls may still lie ahead. But it is as a campaigning Prince of Wales, rather than as an elderly monarch, that Charles has decided to earn his place with posterity.
On the sofa of Prince Charles's apartment in Kensington Palace sits a cushion embroidered with a frog, which is wearing a crown and croaking, "It's no fun being a prince." Well, unlike the rest of us, Prince Charles can't change his job, but unlike many of his predecessors, he's become determined to make the most of a difficult, uncomfortable, and ill-defined role. As he reaches the age of 40, this immensely popular Crusader prince shows every sign of becoming a major force for good in the kingdom over which he will one day reign.
Tomorrow at 9 on TVS, pressure is mounting against Bernard Sampson. terrible liar, Bernard Sanson. Did anyone ever tell you that?
Do you ask the wives of all your friends to do this sort of thing for you?
The game proceeds, Bernard.
But the pace is telling. Ian Holm in Game, Set and Match tomorrow at 9 on TVS.
I'm not going to believe this.
You're right, I'm not.
I'm really sorry I'm late.
Late? We're on the coffee.
Gold blend. Just in time.
Well, now, I think you know everyone, except...
We've already met.
We share the same taste in coffee.
Golden roasted, richer, smoother, Nescafe Gold Blend.
Are you always this late?
I won't be tomorrow.
What's happening tomorrow?
I'm inviting you for dinner.
What makes you think I'll accept?
You can't resist my coffee.
Napolina, grazie.
È la prima volta che Alessio
On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 12 ovens cooking, 11 cameras clicking, 10 soaps a smelling, 9 writers typing, 8 games a playing, 7 phones a ringing, 6 chucks a munching.
At Boots this Christmas, we've got more presents than ever before.
5 makeup tins, 4 aftershaves, 3 flowered pots, 2 stereos, and a kettle for making the tea.
We've got Christmas shopping all wrapped up.
In Marseillan, we have a well-kept secret. Noailles. Here under the warm Mediterranean sun, the magic begins to happen. Slowly, the secret of Noailles is revealed. An aperitif so cool, dry, and refreshingly French. Noailles. Come share our secret.
Boone's back, Tuesday at 9.
Nothing, Ted. I'm just about fed up with being treated like an office boy.
We get a job that wouldn't tax the imagination of an 18-year-old police cadet. And you screw it up in a way I wouldn't have thought possible.
But it gets much worse.
Will you do the same thing again, Miss Lord? What's your involvement? That's all right. Don't tell me honestly, is this my best size? Oh, sorry, mate.
Boone, Tuesday at 9 on TVS.
Back to tonight, and at 9 o'clock, it's Tales of the Unexpected. First, we join the studios of ITN once again for an update of the national and international news.
The news from ITN.
15 children injured as car hits a Poppy Day parade. Enniskillen remembers its dead a year after the IRA bomb. Police find Anna's shoe. Now they fear the worst. And after this tackle, an operation tomorrow for England's Gary Stevens. Good evening. 15 children were injured today when a sports car slammed into a Poppy Day parade in Birmingham. Tonight, 2 boys aged 9 and 11 are in a serious condition in hospital. The accident happened as a procession of scouts, guides, cubs and brownies was walking along a dual carriageway. Parents have criticised the police for failing to take proper precautions.
The marchers were in the fast lane of the dual carriageway, a route they've used for 19 years. The car driver braked on the bend as he saw them, hit the curb and ploughed through the middle of the parade, leaving the injured strewn across the carriageway.
People screaming, girls screaming, parents screaming because the parents saw it. It was just horrible.
Parents of those taking part said a more visible police presence would have warned drivers.
They may persecute this driver, but the police are going to take 40% of the blame. Where was the back vehicle? It's no good having a police vehicle down here when there's no traffic coming up to meet them.
We are responsible people. We will have to look and examine our procedures and our review, especially in this case, and take the appropriate action in the future accordingly. But we do appreciate that there has been a tremendous accident and a dreadful accident today.
10 victims are still in hospital. Several said they had assumed traffic behind them was being controlled.
I found it unbelievable that a car was allowed to travel on the inside of the parade whilst there were 100 to 200, I don't know how many exactly, young people and people from the British Legion actually parading.
The car driver was breathalyzed at the scene with a negative result. He is in hospital in deep shock. Anne Lucas, ITN, Birmingham.
The Queen led Britain's tribute to the war dead at the Cenotaph in London today, 70 years after the end of the First World War. Veterans, servicemen and politicians joined her in remembering those who gave their lives for their country. They also remembered the 11 people who died in the Enniskillen bombing a year ago.
The veterans had travelled from all over the British Isles and the Commonwealth, thousands of medals glittering in the sunshine as they arrived to pay their respects to the fallen. On the rooftops, armed police and soldiers, a reminder that the threat of violence belongs to the present as well as the past, as the firing of a cannon signalled the traditional 2-minute silence. The Queen laid the first wreath to commemorate those killed in all wars since the First World War. The Prime Minister led the tributes from the politicians, the ceremony ending with a proud march past by the old soldiers, sailors and airmen. Paul Davis, ITN, at the Cenotaph.
The centre of Enniskillen was sealed off by security forces early this morning as the army mounted a search and sweep operation using sniffer dogs to check for explosives. As they gathered round the War Memorial to pay respect to the dead of 2 world wars, the memories of those killed here just 1 year ago by the IRA bomb were still keenly felt. During the laying of wreaths, they sang a hymn composed by an Enniskillen man, "Abide with Me." Each church then held a service of remembrance.
As you remember today, you remember first of all the horrors of war, and you and all of us pledge ourselves to work for peace and harmony in our country, in our community, and in this tragic town of ours.
Today, 2 special programmes as we celebrate Prince Charles' 40th birthday. We follow His Royal Highness as he meets young people here in the heart of Birmingham. We talk to royal observers, Paul James and Hugo Vickers. And we meet other 40th birthday viewers.
Hello and welcome. Today, as if you hadn't guessed, Prince Charles is 40 and he's in Birmingham to meet the people and to launch a national fundraising appeal for his Youth Business Trust. We've cameras down at the Palisade Shopping Centre to see him meeting young entrepreneurs who've benefited from the Trust's support. And later, in a daytime live special at 2:15 this afternoon, we'll see the Prince at a converted tram depot in the heart of the inner city for a birthday party with 1,500 youngsters, one of whom will be Judy Spires. Judy, have you ever met him before?
No, and sadly I'm not going to meet him today, but when I was younger, sort of modelled myself as Princess Anne and my brother as Prince Charles, because we had the same coats, and I used to fancy we looked a bit like the Australian
the thing with the little velvet collar?
The little velvet collar, the double-breasted ones,
I had one of those as well. Are you a great admirer, Sue?
I have to say I am, yes, I really am. And I think now he's 40, he seems to have a newfound, real, genuine self-confidence and centre of gravity. And I think he very much does speak for the silent majority now. I think he's the voice of the silent majority.
He is. You get people saying, but is he speaking for the majority? And there's most of us at home saying, yes, he is. Wonderful, isn't it? However, we're going over now to the Palisades, where the Prince arrived just a few minutes ago. And we're going to go and see what he said in a speech he made over there, I think.
We will cut this cake with the ceremonial sword, which has been made available by Wilkinson Sword. It's a very fine cake and an equally impressive appeal target, which the Trust is confident of achieving in various juicy slices. May I tell you about Susan Harvey? She set up her business, which she calls Whipped Elegance, in June of this year with a £1,000 loan from the PYBT. She's been working on this display for several weeks, and you'll see in a minute why there are 10 extra cakes. Your Royal Highness, could I invite you to say a few words?
Lord Boreman, ladies and gentlemen, I don't really on this occasion want to say too much because there are a large number of very hard-working and committed people around here who are going to be running the appeal from now on, who can say a lot more, I think, about it. But I am enormously grateful, is all I can say, to those people who are prepared to give up their time, like they are, to launch this appeal and to carry it out. A large number of people have been extremely generous with their time and their expertise to enable all sorts of things to get off the ground, particularly the advertising and all that kind of thing. So I am deeply grateful. I'm also amazed, really, that after these years, 5 years now, of the Prince's Youth Business Trust, that we've been able to start off 4,700 businesses, which involves 6,000 young people. And that, I think, is very encouraging. So this particular appeal, if we raise the 40 million, and we then have another 40 million in matching grant from Her Majesty's government, this should make a very substantial difference. The point will be, I think, that the organization will then be the biggest voluntary seed corn finance operation anywhere in the world. And I hope that that will enable even more young people who are courageous and determined enough to want to start their own enterprises to be able to get off the ground. And I'm quite convinced that in the future, this will have been a well worthwhile investment to make in terms of future prosperity and well-being. So I very much hope that this will be a success. It seems an awful lot of money, and it's just as well it wasn't launched when I was 80. Otherwise, you'd all have been wondering what the hell had hit you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish all those who are going to take part in this appeal every possible success, and I look forward to seeing, I hope, a successful conclusion.
Very nice start there. Nice to see, you know, I mean, would you believe it's 20 years since he made his first speech, but it's nice to see on this one that he had a badge on his lapel saying life begins at 40.
Well, because he is known for his humour, isn't he? Not just with the goons, but he is a very, very humorous man. In fact, he was once quoted as saying that having a sense of humour was the only thing that kept him sane. A new book called One's Life is bound to tickle the royal funny bone. It's Charles' life story as seen through the eyes of cartoonists. The editor, Charles Nevitt, was the first director of the Prince's latest charity, Inner City Aid, and all the book's royalties, if you'll pardon the pun, go to that charity. Well, I'll be meeting Charles Nevitt a little later. The cartoons are funny, affectionate, critical sometimes, but they catch a popular idea more economically than any words could do. This Trog picture, for instance, satirises the Prince's concern for the community, with Mrs. Thatcher saying,
"This inner city ain't big enough for both of us."
Well, Mac makes fun of Charles' disapproval of modern architecture.
For heaven's sake, Charles, he's only a child.
Here, Griffin gets mileage out of those rumours that the Prince talked to his plants.
Have you asked your plant whether it wants a piece of Harry's birthday cake?
Well, sometimes Charles is painted as a rather reluctant participant in the antics of the younger royals. After the famous incident where Di and Fergie were said to have dressed up as policewomen, Zoke shows a forlorn HRH trying to enter into the spirit of things, and Griffin shows him sheepishly looking on at the grand royal It's a Knockout. But perhaps it's the Prince's marriage, that regal tabloid soap opera, that provides the best cartoons. They portray the couple's differences in taste, poetry reading versus pop music, or Charles as the downtrodden husband.
Sorry, darling, it's the best I can do with the staff gone.
It seems that the British appetite for royalty and jokes about them is insatiable, but at least today's caricaturists can afford to be hard-hitting, as Mel Kelman put it.
In the old days, if a prince didn't find a joke funny, you lost your head.
Now, presumably, it's just the knighthood, and maybe for Alan Titchmarsh for that fine portrayal of the royal family there, Alan.
That Malay somewhere behind the Lord Lieutenant of the County in glittering uniform. Somebody waving a hand. He seems to be surrounded by all sorts of people. Obviously a very popular visit. He was last in Birmingham on the 14th of September this year, so he does come and go around the city. He knows what he's speaking about when he insults its architecture. Liz, he'll be meeting people who've done what kind of projects in there?
All sorts of projects. There are businesses in the security alarm business, upholstery, furniture making, potters, jewellery craftsman, a glass blower. So it's a very wide selection.
He's probably also, no doubt, going to be taking a bit of flack back, maybe, for saying things about the Birmingham Bullring, saying it had no charm, no scale, no character, except arrogance. It is a planned accident, he said. No doubt one or two of those people in there will be coming up and saying the equivalent of dead right, mate, with a Birmingham accent. He does feel very strongly. Is it something he communicates through the Youth Business Trust?
What, about the architecture or his general caring?
About the architecture.
We haven't heard too much on the sort of the architectural side. We obviously hear much more about the sort of the young people we've helped, and are they getting the right sort of help and advice as their business progresses.
Of course, what people will say is, how much of a direct interest does the Prince take? Is it really just an organisation over which he presides at a distance? Here we can see him really getting down into it.
He gets regular reports on our activities, and if there's something that strikes him as something we should be looking at much more closely, he will let our chief executive know. And then we try and find ways of ensuring that we put that into action.
But he is Cameraman's Youth Business Trust, which is all about a security firm. This young man, I think, Liz, was given some money and sponsored by the Trust.
That's right. He had both the bursary and the loan. His name is Miles Bailey. He's 23 and he installs car alarms. It's a mobile business, and so therefore he believes he can offer a cheaper service than if you sort of go into a garage.
That's obviously the stuff he's selling. Now, he's given Prince Charles, I believe, the challenge of trying to get into a Porsche, which one of his alarms has been fitted to, and in fact he had a go to see if he could get in. I presume he didn't get in there, it did work, and he's probably now ordering one for the Royal Aston Martin. It did work indeed, I'm told, so he obviously went shrieking off. Now, how long has this particular firm been going?
Miles has been running his business since May. Previous to that, he was unemployed.
The 1 o'clock news from the BBC with Philip Hayton.
Good afternoon. The President of Israel has asked the outgoing Prime Minister, Yitzhak Shamir, to form a new government. Mr. Shamir now has the support of the newly strengthened religious parties, but he wants a broad-based government, possibly including Labour. A lawyer representing a family involved in the so-called Northern Ireland shoot-to-kill inquest has walked out. 800 nurses strike over regrading, and many more work to rule. Electioneering in Pakistan, how the Wali of Swat woos the voters. And the birthday in Birmingham. Prince Charles meets the people on the way to his party. The power struggle in Israel to find the next government has apparently more than 1,000 young people have organized a huge birthday party in a disused tram depot. His decision to spend much of the day there is seen as a mark of his commitment to the regeneration of Britain's inner cities and the welfare and future of young people. They're both causes to which the Prince has shown considerable enthusiasm and dedication. The birth of the Queen's first son prompted much national rejoicing. The Prince has been brought up in the full glare of world attention, with his every move watched and analysed. At school, he was described as shy and sensitive. At first, he didn't much like Gordonstoun, but his father thought the school's Spartan regime would do him good. And it wasn't long before he acquired a taste for physical challenges and became an action man. Prince Charles was invested as the Prince of Wales in 1969. He was aware then that he could be heir to the throne for much of his life. It could be a long and ill-defined apprenticeship for the throne.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship.
The Prince married quite late, but his choice of bride in 1981, Lady Diana Spencer, captivated the nation. Their wedding had a fairy tale quality, the dashing prince and his beautiful bride. They had 2 children, Prince William and Prince Harry. The Prince has been determined to be Prince of all his future subjects. The problems of the inner city caught his attention. It was no passing fancy. He cared deeply as a prince and a person about regenerating decayed urban areas and providing new hope for young people. His other passion was architecture. He became the scourge of the modernists. He advocated buildings with a human scale which had a sense of history. His views struck a chord across the nation. The Prince stirred much controversy with this comment on the extension to the National Gallery.
But what is proposed seems to me like a monstrous carbuncle on the face of a much loved and elegant friend.
And recently, the Prince has made an impression internationally. Last week, the French accorded him the rare honor of inviting him to join President Mitterrand for a Remembrance Day ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe. Prince Charles began his birthday trip to Birmingham with a visit to the Palisades shopping centre. There, he met dozens of young people who set up their own businesses supported by the Prince's Youth Business Trust. Afterwards, Prince Charles made an appeal for £40 million to help the trust continue its work.
Collecting birthday cards as he went, Prince Charles arrived in the Palisades shopping centre in the heart of Birmingham. It's no surprise that he should have chosen to spend today of all days here. His commitment to improving the quality of life in our inner cities, and particularly the life of young people, runs deep. His first task this morning was to launch a national appeal for the Youth Business Trust, which he set up 2 years ago. And it was no coincidence that the target he announced was £40 million, and that'll be matched pound for pound by the government. To date, the Trust has helped nearly 5,000 young people set up in business on their own, with loans, grants and financial advice. Some were there this morning to tell the Prince about their progress. Another recipient was Susan Harvey, who set up her own catering business with a loan from the Trust. Today, she presented Prince Charles with a cake, the first, no doubt, of several he'll be invited to sample during the course of his birthday celebrations.
And you can see the Prince of Wales' speech in Birmingham this afternoon in a daytime live special, The Birthday.
Prince Charles's 40th birthday. Today, Daytime Live and a special second edition celebrates with the people of Birmingham. A little while ago, His Royal Highness arrived at a converted tram depot in the heart of the inner city for a birthday party with 1,500 youngsters who've all been helped by the Prince's Trust. So, welcome to Daytime Live and the Birthday Prince. Hello. Well, there must be many ways an heir to the throne could decide to spend his 40th birthday, but it's perhaps typical of Prince Charles that he should have chosen an occasion that'll give as much fun to other people as to himself. Earlier this morning, we saw him down at the Palisades shopping centre here in Birmingham, meeting young entrepreneurs who'd benefited from his Youth Business Trust. He's just been to a converted Victorian baths, which have been renovated by youngsters in Handsworth, and we're going to be going live to the Transport Museum at Witten Lane in Aston for His Royal Highness's birthday speech in front of young people who've all benefited from the Prince's Trust. But first of all, welcome back to our royal observers, Paul James and Hugo Vickers, both respected royal biographers, and also to Dr. Bill Smith, who's the fundraising executive of the Prince's Trust. And Dr. Smith, could I ask you first of all, why Prince Charles chose Birmingham to celebrate his 40th birthday?
I think there are two reasons. One, 2 years ago he visited Birmingham and set off a number of projects, and one of these was the renovation of the tram depot, which is being done by Task Undertakings. And the second reason is the one that you've mentioned. It gives him the opportunity to meet live 1,500 young people who've been helped by the Trust, or one of the Trusts.
Right.
And it is a central location in the country.
Because he set off a number of projects, didn't he, when he visited Handsworth a couple of years ago? He decided to launch a number of projects. And this one helps the long-term unemployed, is that right?
Task Undertakings takes young people onto their course, if I can use that word, for 12 months. Teaches them a skill, usually in the building trades, and hopefully at the end of the 12 months they actually end up with a job.
Right. The Prince's Trust itself was set up 12 years ago. What are its aims and achievements?
Its aims. In a nutshell, its aim is to help disadvantaged young people, particularly to do something to help themselves. To do this, we give them modest once-off cash grants and hopefully some backup advice. The something to help themselves can be literally anything in the fields of sport, leisure, music, arts, crafts, or just something to broaden their experience.
Now, this morning, the Prince was appealing for £40 million just to help the Prince's Youth Business Trust. What about the Prince's Trust as a whole? How much money does that need?
Relatively modest by that scale. The £40 million that was being appealed for this morning, it will be a capital fund so that the Prince's Youth Business Trust can draw the interest from it and service its ongoing needs. The Prince's Trust itself, which is a separate charity, needs to raise about £2.5 million a year.
I know the Prince dislikes bureaucracy, and so you manage to keep bureaucracy to a lowest level possible. How do you manage that?
We have a very, very small central office, just 5 people. And of those, 3 are actually on secondment, including myself. So our overheads are literally very, very small.
It's quite admirable, really, isn't it?
We can honestly say that over 90% of the money that comes into the Trust actually goes out to the young people.
We were talking yesterday about the crusading Prince, and this seems to be the Prince's crusade now, doesn't it? To try and help the inner cities and through helping young people, really. Is that right, Hugo?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's something that he takes very seriously indeed. And people have talked about how he's been lost and all this sort of thing, but he's established what he wants to do, and he's very much out there and busily doing it.
Because people say he's finding it difficult to find himself a role, but I think he's creating one rather nicely for himself.
I think he's looking upon the young people as the next generation. They're the people who will be there when he is king, and he's very concerned about the conditions, the environment, employment, and you know, we wish him luck in that.
Well, he's having to socialise more today, perhaps, than he's had to socialise in an awful lot of years. Is he at home, do you think, doing the gay social world? Presumably more so now than he ever was, but does he find it a comfortable thing to do, going out and meeting people?
I think he does on occasions like today, because he has a common bond with the the people that he's meeting and is obviously helping through the Prince's Trust. Perhaps he doesn't feel as at ease or at home at parties or clubs perhaps as Diana would, but certainly now through over 20 years of royal engagements, I think he does socialise, does enjoy it.
Well, he's had all sorts of fatings today. He's had countless cakes. He's going to get another one shortly. He's also had a song, which has been specially composed for him, I gather. It's a special song for his birthday, a birthday tribute, and it's written by Birmingham teenager Dominic King, and it's performed by Jane Williamson. And we're going over to look at that now. It's the Prince actually in the tram shed at the back, and he's still wearing his Life Begins
Please
at
feel
40 badge.
free to raise your arms while singing, please.
And if Jane Williamson is going to come any nearer with her song than this. The mate. A little difficulty there with the coordination. This amazing building, an old tram shed once derelict, now turned into a transport museum, very much with the help of the Prince's Trust. Steve Wright, Radio 1 DJ, talking to him, no doubt deciding whether or not to play it on his show next week. That's the Prince is putting in a little influence. Maybe he will. And there a view of some of the 1,500 young people who've been helped by the Prince's Trust. Not too many people daring to go for the final high note there. Only the singer, Jane Williamson, managed to reach it perfectly. Well, there'll now be a toast to Prince Charles by the chairman of the Prince's Trust, Jim Gardner, industrial designer and consultant who's designed Cartier jewellery and is responsible for the visual design of the QE2.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, it was to be my intention to try and summarise Your Royal Highness's first 40 years in the space of 1 minute. But other more distinguished people than I have written a few books and they failed to do that. So may I just say this, that you are and continue to be an inspiration to those of us who have had the privilege of working with you in those organisations under your hand, and particularly the Prince's Trust. And could I say this, sir, that the 1,500 young people who have travelled the length and breadth of the United Kingdom to be here today, from the rural parts and from the inner cities in the north, from all over the United Kingdom, these are a true measure of the work that has been achieved by the Trust, and they represent the tens and thousands of young people who have been disadvantaged and who have benefited from the work that you set in motion in 1976 and is still going on, and I believe will continue. Your Royal Highness, may we wish you a very happy 40th birthday.
There's no doubt that that's a sentiment echoed by the floor. Now the Prince hands his glass over, orange juice or box fizz, and takes to the microphone for his reply.
You don't... I can't believe you really want me to say anything, but all I can say is, ladies and gentlemen, that it's one of those extremely enjoyable but also incredibly embarrassing occasions for me. But I've been enormously touched, is all I can say, by all the effort that so many people have put into arranging this very special birthday party for me. I'm not sure that I ought to be reminded of it, but my children reminded me of it, I can assure you, with this badge. But apart from anything else, I can't help feeling what have I done to deserve all this? Because you've been more than kind. And only the other day, I was inquiring of an entire bed of old-fashioned roses who were forced to listen to my demented ramblings on the meaning of the universe as I sat cross-legged in the lotus position on the gravel path in front of them. And I was inquiring of them what they thought would happen on my birthday in a Birmingham tram shed. A tram shed, they all replied, totally aghast at the thought. Yes, I said, a tram shed. But can't they find anything more salubrious in Birmingham? Asked the Koning von Denmark, who by now had lost her petals and was looking decidedly the worse for wear. Apparently not, I said. They seem to have knocked most of them down. At this point, a row of prize Welsh leeks, cocky little things, which were lurking in a nearby vegetable patch, chipped in to say that they expected the shed would be filled with groups of semi-naked Kalahari bushmen, gyrating wildly in the reenactment of a primeval fertility dance, and also a troop or two of Tibetan Buddhist monks who had proceeded from Saffron Walden by levitational means, armed with advanced copies of the tabloid newspapers, which would be strewn in my path in a form of ancient Buddhist greeting. Don't be so ridiculous, I replied. They wouldn't dare do that. Oh, yes, they would. Chorused half an acre of Brussels sprouts. And what's more, they'll have flown in all your favorite gurus, an entire flock of pedigree gurus, to advise you very carefully on what to say to the crowds of wailing bushmen and the troops of hovering Buddhists. But looking around here, ladies and gentlemen, I see those idiotic flowers have got it wrong again. I knew they would. Instead, you've given me one of the best birthday parties I could ever have hoped for. When I first started such organizations as the Prince's Trust and then the Prince's Youth Business Trust, which has grown from it, I never imagined for 1 minute that they would become big enough to start giving expensive parties like this one. But it's all, I can assure you, extremely rewarding and encouraging if you can see one person's life transformed by this means, as we've tried to do. And I promise you it's worth it just for one person. That's what I've always felt anyway. So it is particularly encouraging to see self-confidence grow in people, developing to a point where they can go out and face the world head on. The talent, as far as I'm concerned, is all there. The enthusiasm is all there. I can see it every time I meet any of you. So is the willingness, the commitment, and the compassion to do something constructive and beneficial for this country. The task, as I see it, will be for organizations such as the ones with which I am associated to harness all those positive elements and help make this nation an even better place to live in. None of what has been achieved so far, or what can be achieved in the future, is possible without all those remarkably generous and selfless people who are rash enough to become involved in the teams helping me with these various projects. And I cannot thank them enough. I rely on them totally, and they deserve untold gratitude. And so, I may say, do all those public-spirited companies, banks, department stores, nationalized industries, privatized industries, finance houses, and institutions who have the imagination to send us seconded personnel to make all these schemes function. Their help is absolutely crucial and deserves, I think, to be recognized more fully. Now, when I'm very old, if I survive the next 40 years, but perhaps by then they'll have engineered all sorts of genetic accoutrements which will prolong active life and ensure that I'm still addressing birthday parties at the age of 150. If I survive, then I will hope to see the successful results of the investment that we have tried to make, albeit in a very small way, in the future prosperity and well-being of the inhabitants of this remarkable country. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for giving me such a jolly birthday.
Well, the kind of speech there that one would expect from a man with a great sense of humour. Not too much in there to make the architects feel unhappy. But now on comes the cake, made and delivered by students of Birmingham College of Food, Tourism and Creative Studies.
Okay, so that whole area there, please, entirely cleared before we can proceed.
They're just adjusting the top tier of the cake. It's taken, would you believe, 5 weeks to design, bake and decorate. I hope it's not 5 weeks old. You can see the top tier's removable, the tier with the crown on. And that's actually to enable Prince Charles to take it home tonight, because we're told he's got a party at Buckingham Palace, so there should be enough there to go around a few people. And on the top there you can see the Prince's Trust logo.
Can you come away from the front of the press stand as well, please?
I think far too many people must be curious and anxious for a slice of this cake. St Paul's Cathedral there on the top in icing, a fishing scene to the left. All aspects of 40 years of an amazingly full life. In fact, the cake is so large, the trolley it's on, we're told, is being wheeled in on the old tram tracks, so there's not too much choice as to which direction it can go in. Have to clear people out the way. Charles Nevitt's with us. Charles, what's your reaction to the speech?
Well, I think obviously the Prince is on terrific form and enjoying his birthday party very much indeed. I just noticed actually there on the top tier of the cake, St Paul's seems to be disappearing into a morass of concrete, so perhaps that's a comment from the cake designers and makers.
Never has the Prince had quite such a squeeze to get to his birthday cake. By my counting, this is at least the fourth one he's had today. This morning he was carving into it with a ceremonial sword, all flashing steel. What, I wonder, will they give him to slice into this one? As ever, finds it irresistible going into a crowd. Simply has to talk. Always gets told off because he's late when he gets to the end of an engagement. Doesn't seem to mind, knows it's the people he's there to meet. Happy to talk to them. And here comes the knife. Which tier? Top one? No, that's to take away later. Take a bit off the middle or the bottom, she said. And will it go in? Yes, it does. There's a few heavy sighs of relief there. As the fascia falls away, and so does the majority of the cake. Surrounded by a host of young people, snapping away with their cameras, all going home saying, I was there. The man you can see just behind the Prince's shoulder is Tom Shabir, director of the Prince's Trust. He's been presented with a wonderful pop-up book of the tram shed, now a transport museum out of an old tumble-down tram shed, new life. And the birthday card there, signed by every single young person in the hall. Thanks the chef, says sorry about the icing, sorry I dropped it on the floor. And these are some of the many students from Birmingham College of Food, Tourism and Creative Studies who helped put that cake together, work out its form, decide on what shape it should be, bake it, ice it, and get it there without any of it falling apart. And now in the background, the band strikes up. Here comes a bell. Now this is the point at which everybody wonders if the Prince will dance or not. He's been brought a ship's bell from HMS Donington. Inquiring about the top layer of the cake and saying, can you possibly wrap it up for later? And there he gets it in his hand. He'll never get it home without that crown breaking. I wouldn't like to take that on either the Royal Train or an aeroplane. Paul and Hugo. Interesting speech there. Not a lot of knocking copy on his birthday, but showing his tremendous humour at being able to take all the stories of talking to plants and put them out again as though it were just a joke, which of course it is.
I think that's very interesting what he's just done, because it reminds me very much of the Queen's speech at her silver wedding in the Guildhall. There were a lot of jokes about the Queen always saying, my husband and I, and if you remember, she used that, and I honestly don't believe I've ever heard that joke made again. And I imagine that Prince Charles has probably put all those kind of jokes firmly in their place now.
And they loved it as well. But I mean, he's got this tremendous influence. People say, you know, he comes out with all these comments about architecture and things he doesn't like. Do people, i.e. the architects, listen and take notice? Do you think they do?
They most certainly do, yes. I mean, whether they take notice or not, they take notice some way. Charles probably knows more about that.
Yes, I certainly agree. I mean, he's been on this architectural tack for
quite a long time. And here he is, he has actually taken to the floor. Prince Charles often suggested his sense of rhythm is not all it should be, but he knows a thing or two about classical musicianship. And I don't think he's too bad, A, when he can hear the music, and B, when there's a reasonable floor underneath him that's not cobbles and covered in cables. They're queuing up now for a dance. Well, the Prince has crammed in everything today. He's visited all parts of Birmingham. He's seen children and youths involved with the Prince's Trust, with the Prince's Youth Business Scheme. He's looked at community projects. He's looked at the centre of Birmingham, at all the different kinds of architecture, some of which he loathes. But he's generally proved, as if it needed proving, that he's most definitely a friend of the people, and on occasions, a voice of the people. And as Walter Bagehot, that great English commentator, said in the English Constitution, all the world and the glory of it, whatever is most attractive, whatever is most seductive, has always been offered to the Prince of Wales of the day, and always will be. It's not rational to expect the best virtue where temptation is applied in the most trying form at the frailest time of human life. But surely anybody who's seen this Prince of Wales today will know he's not doing so bad.
On Wednesday, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales announces a competition to put the heart back into Britain's cities. Anita Roddick launches the competition on a whirlwind tour.
People are now seeing the need to reclaim the cities as a place of celebration, a gathering, sharing of ideas. They are now saying, the city belongs to us. It's our city. It's my city.
All over Britain on Wednesday at 10:20.
Well, our tribute to the birthday prince has left us with some extra time in